Pericles, the first citizen of Athens, became the defining political figure of what later generations would call the Athenian Golden Age. Through his leadership and policies, he strengthened Athenian democracy, directed ambitious building projects, and played a central role in establishing Athens as the dominant naval power in the Greek world. But to understand how one man came to shape an entire era, we need to step into Athens at the height of its transformation. The 5th century BC marked a period of unusual cultural, political, and economic vitality in one corner of ancient Greece. Socrates began laying the foundations of Western philosophy. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides produced dramas still performed today. The sculptor Phidias created monumental works, including the statue of Zeus at Olympia, later counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Herodotus began writing history as an inquiry. Hippocrates helped shape the ethical principles associated with the Hippocratic Oath. All of these figures lived and worked in the same city, Athens. This period is often called the Golden Age of Athens. It is also known as the Age of Pericles, named for the statesman who guided the city through these decades and whose influence became inseparable from the era itself. If this was the age that bore his name, then the story begins long before the Parthenon rose above the Acropolis. It begins with the forces that shaped Pericles himself. Even as a child, Pericles' life was shaped by power and politics. Pericles was born in 495 BC into one of Athens' most influential families. His father was a naval commander and politician. His mother belonged to the powerful Alcmaeonid clan and descended from Clisthenes, the reformer, who strengthened democracy after the fall of Pisistratus. He received an elite education, but his childhood was not free from turmoil. Around age 10, his father was ostracized, a formal exile for those deemed politically dangerous. During the Persian invasion, his father returned to command the Athenian navy, restoring his reputation before his death a few years later. Pericles entered public life with both inherited prestige and first-hand experience of how quickly political fortune could shift. Yet prestige alone was not enough. To rise in Athens, he would have to navigate one of the most complex political systems in the ancient world. To understand the rise of Pericles, we first need to understand Athenian democracy. Power in ancient Athens was once split between 2 key offices, the archons and the strategoi. Archons were chief magistrates responsible for civic and religious duties. By the 5th century BC, however, their influence had mostly faded. Real authority lay with the strategoi, 10 elected generals who led the military and held significant political power. Unlike archons, who were chosen by lot, the strategoi were elected annually. This made the office one of the most influential positions in Athens. This is the arena Pericles entered. Here, skill, persuasion, and repeated election could translate into extraordinary authority, all within a democratic framework. And it was within this competitive public arena that Pericles began his careful ascent. Pericles didn't rush into politics. Early on, he avoided public speaking and focused on a military career. Part of his caution came from his resemblance, in both appearance and voice, to Pisistratus, the former tyrant whose memory still unsettled Athens. In his early 20s, he entered public life. In 472 BC, he sponsored a production of Aeschylus's The Persians, a play celebrating the Greek victory at Salamis and associated with democratic pride. The gesture signalled his alignment with the pro-democratic faction. His main rival was Cimon, son of the hero Miltiades. Cimon relied on immense wealth and strong ties with Sparta. Pericles, in contrast, cultivated discipline and restraint. Their rivalry reached a turning point during the Helot revolt in Sparta in 462 BC. Cimon persuaded Athens to send troops, but the Spartans dismissed the force, fearing democratic influence. The humiliation destroyed Cimon's standing. The following year, he was ostracized. With his chief opponent gone, Pericles' faction rose to dominance. Leadership initially rested with his mentor, Ephialtes, who weakened aristocratic institutions and strengthened democracy. After Ephialtes' assassination, Pericles emerged as Athens' leading statesman, consolidating power through repeated elections as strategos. During this period, he formed a long-term partnership with Aspasia of Miletus, an intellectually prominent figure in Athens. Together they had a son, Pericles the Younger. Through political skill, strategic alliances, and the elimination of rivals, Pericles became the dominant figure in Athenian politics, the statesman who would define Athens' Golden Age. But his leadership did not unfold in isolation. As he consolidated power at home, Athens itself was expanding abroad, and that expanse reshaped the Greek world. Even after defeating Persia, tensions simmered between Greece's city-states. Sparta had the dominant military power, leading the Peloponnesian League, but resentment toward its leadership was growing, especially as it showed little interest in freeing Greek cities still under Persian control in Ionia and Asia Minor. In 478 BC, Athens led a new alliance, the Delian League, named for the island of Delos, where its treasury was kept. The League publicly aimed to continue the fight against Persia. In practice, it also served to check Spartan influence. Tensions between the Delian and Peloponnesian leagues steadily increased. Athens rebuilt its defensive walls, despite Spartan objections, and expanded the alliance. Over time, the Delian League effectively became an Athenian empire. Member states contributed troops or tribute in exchange for protection, but as external threats faded, tribute increasingly replaced military service, and within decades, the League's forces were overwhelmingly Athenian. In 454 BC, Heracles moved the League's treasury from Delos to Athens, arguing it was safer behind the city walls. The funds financed ambitious public works, most notably the reconstruction of the Acropolis. Pericles appointed Phidias to oversee the projects, including the monumental statue of Athena inside the Parthenon, new sanctuaries, and a grand Odeon for musical performances. This use of allied funds sparked intense criticism. Thucydides, son of Melesias, attempted to have Pericles ostracized for corruption. Pericles responded with a calculated proposal. He offered to finance the projects himself, if they were dedicated solely to him. The proposal alarmed the assembly and backfired on Thucydides, who was ostracized instead. Athens now stood wealthier, stronger, and more confident than ever, but also more feared, and that fear would soon erupt into open conflict. It's moments like this, where democracy, power, and empire meet, that make this period so compelling. If you enjoy exploring history at this level, subscribe to TheCollector for more. Peace between Athens and Sparta didn't last. Trouble began when Megara left the Peloponnesian League, sparking conflict with Corinth, one of Sparta's closest allies. Athens, still focused on Persia, hesitated to escalate at first. Soon, however, Athens and Sparta were fighting indirectly through their allies. They clashed directly at Tanagra in 457 BC. Sparta won the battle but withdrew to regroup, and Athens quickly recovered, launching naval attacks on Spartan-aligned ports. In 454 BC, Athens sent 200 ships to support a campaign in Egypt against Persia. The expedition ended in disaster at the siege of Prosopis, weakening Athens and encouraging revolts among its allies. Matters worsened in 447 BC when Athenian forces suffered a land defeat against the Boeotians, forcing Pericles to rely increasingly on naval supremacy. Meanwhile, Cimon returned from exile in 451 BC to aid Athens against Persia. Pericles allowed him back on one condition: he commanded operations at sea, far from Athens. Later, Cimon helped negotiate 30 years peace with Sparta in 446 BC. But the peace was fragile, and the tensions that defined Pericles' career were about to culminate in a far greater test. Even after the 30 years peace, tensions between Athens and Sparta continued, including the Cimmerian War of 440 BC. In 431 BC, open war erupted, the conflict later known as the Peloponnesian War. Pericles adopted a defensive strategy. Rather than confront Sparta's superior land army, he ordered the rural population of Attica to shelter behind Athens' walls, while the navy maintained supply lines and pressure at sea. But the strategy carried unforeseen circumstances. A devastating plague swept through the crowded city, killing perhaps a quarter of the population. Both of Pericles' legitimate sons died. In 429 BC, the disease claimed Pericles himself. Athens was left divided and uncertain, and leadership passed to figures such as Alcibiades and Nicias. Yet Pericles' influence endured. Under his guidance, democratic participation broadened, imperial revenues reshaped the Acropolis, and Athens emerged as the cultural centre of the Greek world. His policies were debated in his lifetime and after his death, but they defined the era. The monuments still stand. The dramas first staged in Athens are still performed. The political institutions refined in his generation are still studied. For that reason, the 5th century BC is remembered not only as the Golden Age of Athens, but as the Age of Pericles. And in that sense, the story comes full circle. A single statesman whose life shaped an age, and whose age, in turn, reshaped the ancient world.